There's a retirement community about 40 minutes from where I live. Nice place. Golf course, clubhouse, the whole setup. And if you spend an afternoon there, you'll notice something strange. Half the people are relaxed, playing cards, taking walks, doing whatever they want. The other half looks stressed. They're working part-time jobs, cutting expenses, worried about healthcare costs, same age, same neighborhood, completely different lives. The difference isn't how much they earned, it's what they did with what they earned. One group spent 40 years building paychecks, the other group spent 40 years building assets. And that gap, that simple fork in the road, determines whether you retire with options or with anxiety. Here's what I'm going to show you: how the wealthy think about money in a fundamentally different way than everyone else. Not smarter, different. And why that difference compounds into life-changing wealth over time. This is about Charlie Munger's core insight, the one most people completely miss. You don't get rich by being brilliant. You get rich by owning things that produce income while you sleep. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan, and I only ask for your email to send the report so I don't store any of your financial data. Link in the description. Let me give you a mental model. Think of money like two separate machines. Machine A requires you to show up every day, pull a lever, and it spits out cash. Miss a day, no cash. That's a paycheck. Machine B sits in your garage and produces cash whether you show up or not. That's an asset. Most people spend their entire lives maintaining Machine A. They optimize it, they upgrade their skills, they negotiate raises, and they completely ignore Machine B. Then one day, Machine A breaks down, they get sick or laid off or just too old, and they realize they own nothing that produces income without them. That's the trap. And it's not about how much Machine A pays. I've watched people making $40,000 a year retire wealthy because they fed Machine B. And I've watched people making $400,000 a year retire broke because they spent everything maintaining their lifestyle. Now, you might be thinking this is just about saving money. It's not. Saving is important, but it's defensive. What I'm talking about is offensive wealth building. There's a story about two brothers, both electricians. Both made roughly $70,000 a year for 30 years. Brother one lived well, nice truck, good vacations, comfortable life. Retired with about $200,000 saved. Brother two drove the same truck for 15 years, took cheaper vacations, looked less successful, retired with $2.3 million. What happened? Brother two understood something critical. Every dollar has a job. You can pay it to consume something today, or you can pay it to buy your freedom tomorrow. Brother one paid his dollars for lifestyle. Brother two paid his dollars for assets that generated more dollars. The math is simple. If you invest $500 a month at 8% annual returns for 30 years, you end up with about $748,000. That same $500 spent on car payments, nicer apartments, and weekend entertainment leaves you with zero. Same income, radically different outcomes. This is where it gets really interesting. Most people think wealth comes from a high income. It doesn't. Wealth comes from the gap between what you earn and what you spend. That gap is everything. A doctor making $300,000 a year who spends $290,000 a year has a $10,000 gap. A teacher making $60,000 a year who spends $45,000 a year has a $15,000 gap. The teacher is getting wealthier faster. Income is just raw material. The gap is the actual product. And here's what nobody tells you. That gap doesn't just sit there. It needs a job. If you leave it in cash, inflation eats it, the purchasing power slowly dissolves. You're saving nothing in real terms. You're watching your future shrink. But if you convert that gap into productive assets, into businesses, stocks, real estate that generates cash flow, now you're building wealth. The gap starts producing its own gap. That's compounding. And compounding is the only force powerful enough to give you financial independence. Let me tell you about a guy named Paul. Not someone I know personally, just a case study that illustrates this perfectly. Paul worked as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company. $55,000 a year in the late 90s. Nothing special, but Paul had one habit. Every month, he took $400 and bought shares of boring companies, utilities, consumer staples, companies that paid dividends. His friends thought he was paranoid. They leased new cars. He drove a used Honda. They upgraded houses. He stayed in a modest ranch. They went to Cancun. He went camping. Fast forward 25 years, Paul's friends are still working, still worried about the next paycheck. Paul retired at 57 with $1.8 million in dividend-paying stocks. Those stocks generate about $72,000 a year in passive income. more than his salary ever was. And he didn't need brilliance. He needed discipline. He automated the investments. He ignored market crashes. He just kept feeding Machine B while everyone else was polishing Machine A. Now, here's where people get confused. They hear stories like Paul's and think it's about deprivation. It's not. It's about clarity. Paul wasn't miserable. He was intentional. He knew what he wanted, freedom, and he knew the price, delayed gratification. Every time his friends bought something new, they got a short dopamine hit and a longer financial obligation. Every time Paul bought an asset, he got a small step toward independence. Different goals, different behaviors, different lives. This is the fork. And most people never even see it. They just drift into consumption because that's what everyone around them does. Their identity becomes consumer instead of owner, and identity determines behavior. If you see yourself as someone who works for money, you optimize for higher paychecks. If you see yourself as someone who owns assets, you optimize for cash flow. Same person, different frame, completely different financial future. Let me show you the numbers clearly because this is where theory becomes tangible. Imagine two people, both 35 years old, both making $80,000 a year. Person A spends $75,000 a year. Person B spends $60,000 a year. That's it. That's the only difference. 20 years later, assuming 7% real returns after inflation, person A has about $254,000. Person B has about $763,000. 3 times more wealth from the same income just by maintaining a larger gap. But here's the part that changes everything. Person B's assets are now generating about $53,000 a year in passive income. That's almost what they need to live on. They're close to financial independence. Person A is nowhere close. They still need their job. They still need Machine A running. One decision, repeated over 20 years, created two completely different realities. Charlie Munger used to say something that most people hear but don't internalize. He said the first rule is don't lose money. The second rule is don't forget the first rule. People think that's about not taking risks. It's not. It's about not doing stupid things. And stupid things are everywhere. Financing a car that depreciates, using a credit card for consumption and paying 18% interest, buying a house that's too expensive and becoming house poor, chasing investment fads because your neighbor is talking about them. These aren't just small mistakes, they're compounding errors. Every dollar lost to stupidity is a dollar that can't compound for you. And over decades, that adds up to millions in foregone wealth. Smart isn't about finding the perfect investment. Smart is about not lighting money on fire. Munger's whole philosophy was inverted. Don't ask how to get rich. Ask how people stay poor, then do the opposite. People stay poor by spending everything, avoiding assets, using bad debt, and chasing complexity. So do the opposite. Spend less, buy assets, avoid bad debt, keep it simple. This brings me to something uncomfortable. Debt. People hear debt and either panic or shrug. Both reactions are wrong. Debt is a tool, like a chainsaw. Used correctly, it's powerful. Used incorrectly, it's catastrophic. There are two kinds of debt. Bad debt finances consumption. You borrow to buy a car, a vacation, furniture, things that either disappear or decline in value. The debt outlives the pleasure. You're paying interest on something that's already gone. That's financial poison. Good debt acquires assets that produce income exceeding the cost of the debt. You borrow at 5% to buy a rental property yielding 8%. The asset services the debt and puts money in your pocket. Same mechanism, opposite outcome. Most people use debt backwards. They finance consumption and avoid investment debt. The wealthy do the opposite. They avoid consumer debt like a disease and use investment debt strategically. This difference alone separates the builders from the broke. Now you're asking yourself, what counts as an asset? Because people call everything an asset. Their house, their car, their watch collection. Most of it isn't. Here's the test. Does it put money in your pocket or take money out? Your primary residence takes money out. Taxes, insurance, maintenance, mortgage. It's shelter, not an asset. Your car takes money out, depreciation, gas, repairs, registration. It's transportation, not an asset. Real assets generate positive cash flow. A rental property that produces income after all expenses. Dividend stocks that send checks quarterly. A business that produces profit. Bonds that pay interest. These are assets. They work for you. Everything else is either neutral or a liability pretending to be an asset. And once you see this distinction clearly, your buying decisions change. You stop asking what you can afford. You start asking, what will this produce? That shift in question is worth more than any investment advice you'll ever receive. Let me give you another real scenario, because abstract concepts don't stick. Meet Linda. 42 years old, nurse, makes $96,000 a year. After taxes, she takes home about $70,000. She spends $55,000 a year on living expenses. That leaves her $15,000 annually. Now, Linda has two paths. Path one, upgrade her life. Nicer apartment, better car, more vacations. Spend that $15,000 on lifestyle. Path two, invest it. She chooses path two. She puts $1,250 per month into a diversified portfolio of index funds, average return 8% annually. At age 62, 20 years later, Linda has accumulated just over $740,000 at a 4% safe withdrawal rate that generates $29,600 per year in passive income. Combined with Social Security and her pension, she's completely comfortable. She retires early, she travels, she volunteers. Meanwhile, her coworkers who chose path one are still working, still stressed, still dependent on their paychecks. Linda didn't earn more. She deployed differently. This is the core of Munger's philosophy. It's not about income, it's about ownership. A paycheck is renting out your time. Assets are owning something that produces value without your time. And here's the cruel irony. Society celebrates high incomes, six-figure salary, executive title, corner office, but none of that matters if you own nothing. A high-paid employee is still an employee, one layoff away from financial stress. But someone who owns assets producing $50,000 a year in passive income has something no salary can give them: independence. They don't need permission. They don't need performance reviews. They don't need to tolerate toxic bosses. Their assets work. They don't have to. That's the real prize, not luxury, autonomy. But now you might think, okay, this all sounds logical, but what about risk? Isn't investing risky? Here's what's actually risky: depending entirely on one income source that can disappear overnight. That's risk. Having zero assets that generate cash flow, that's risk. Believing your paycheck will last forever, that's risk. People think safety is a stable job and a savings account, but that's just comfortable risk, invisible risk. The risk of inflation eroding your savings, the risk of technological disruption eliminating your industry, the risk of health issues forcing early retirement. Real safety is diversification of income sources, and that only comes from ownership. When you own productive assets, you have dozens or hundreds of income streams. One company cuts its dividend, 99 others still pay. One property sits vacant, 4 others are occupied. That's actual security. A paycheck feels safe until it stops. Assets keep producing. Let me tell you what nobody admits. Building wealth is boring. It's not exciting. There's no hack, no secret, no shortcut. It's the same simple actions repeated thousands of times. Save more than you spend. Invest the difference in productive assets. Avoid stupid mistakes. Wait. That's it. But people hate that answer. They want complexity. They want novelty. They want the feeling of activity. So they trade constantly. They chase trends. They buy courses promising wealth in 90 days. And they stay broke. Meanwhile, the boring people who automated their investments and didn't touch them for 20 years wake up wealthy. Consistency beats intensity. Patience beats cleverness. Discipline beats intelligence. These are boring virtues. They're also the only ones that work. I've been managing my own money for over 20 years. Ran a business, retired with a few million in the market, and here's what I learned. The people who succeeded weren't special. They just avoided being stupid longer than everyone else. They didn't panic selling crashes. They didn't chase bubbles. They didn't finance consumption. They didn't confuse activity with progress. They were relentlessly ordinary in the best way possible, and over time, ordinary discipline produces extraordinary results. That's compounding. Not just financial compounding, behavioral compounding. Good habits stacking on previous good habits until wealth becomes inevitable. Now, here's something most people miss entirely: taxes. The system is designed with incentives. Employees get taxed first, then spend what's left. Investors earn, then optimize, then pay taxes on what's left after deductions. That timing difference is massive. An employee making $100,000 pays taxes on $100,000. An investor with $100,000 in income might pay taxes on $60,000 after leveraging depreciation, deductions, and strategic structuring. Same income, different tax bill. The system rewards ownership. It punishes labor. That's not opinion, that's tax code. You can complain about it or you can learn to use it. The wealthy use it and the gap widens. This isn't about loopholes. It's about understanding the game. Employees play one game, owners play a different game with different rules and better outcomes. Let's talk about something else people avoid: identity. You will never outperform your self image for long. If you see yourself as someone who works for money, you'll optimize for higher salaries. If you see yourself as someone who owns assets, you'll optimize for cash flow. If you identify as a consumer, you'll feel productive when you buy things. If you identify as an investor, you'll feel productive when you acquire assets. Same person, different identity, completely different financial trajectory. Most people never question their identity. They inherit it from their parents, their peers, their culture, and they live it out automatically. But identity is a choice. You can decide today that you're an owner, not a consumer, that you're building assets, not chasing paychecks. And that decision, if you actually live it, will compound into millions over your lifetime. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people won't do this. They'll read this, nod along, maybe feel motivated for a day, and then return to their default behavior. They'll keep spending everything, they'll keep ignoring assets, they'll keep optimizing for paychecks, and in 20 years, they'll still be broke, still stressed, still dependent. A small minority will actually change their behavior. They'll automate investments, they'll cut unnecessary spending, they'll say no to lifestyle inflation, they'll prioritize ownership over appearance. And those people will quietly become wealthy. Not because they were smarter, because they were more disciplined. Because they understood that wealth isn't about what you earn, it's about what you keep and what that grows into. Don't work for money, own the companies that do. That's the whole game. You can spend 40 years trading your time for paychecks, or you can spend 40 years building machines that produce paychecks for you. One path requires you to show up every day until you physically can't. The other path gives you options, freedom, autonomy. Same starting point, completely different endings. And the choice is made not once, but every day in small decisions. Do I spend this or invest it? Do I finance consumption or build assets? Do I optimize for appearance or reality? Those daily choices compound into your financial future. So here are 3 things you do immediately. First, calculate your gap. What's the difference between what you earn and what you spend? That number is your seed corn. Protect it, invest it, never consume it. Second, automate asset purchases. Set up automatic transfers into investment accounts. Remove emotion from the process. Make wealth building mechanical, not motivational. Third, audit your spending for financial termites. Subscriptions you don't use. Upgrades you don't need. Consumption disguised as investment. Cut ruthlessly. Every dollar saved is a dollar that can compound for decades. These aren't sexy action steps. They're boring. They're also the only things that work. Most people want exciting. Few people want effective. That's why most people stay broke. You can choose differently. You probably won't, but you can.